All right, welcome everyone to our first episode of Speaking of Education, our podcast here at Mountain Vernon Ventures. And today is just an opportunity for us to kind of chat as a team. My name is Alex Blumenkrans. I'm the Executive Director of Mount Vernon Ventures. If the other two of you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Ben, want to start?
Oh, sure. I was going to say ladies first, but yeah, I'm Ben Potter, previously a humanities teacher at Mount Vernon, now with Mount Vernon Ventures as a consultant of sorts.
And soon to be an online teacher. So
soon to be an online teacher
and future teacher.
Yes, very excited.
Love that.
And I'm Ann Marsh Rutledge, and I have been a learning coach, instructional coach, curriculum designer, and now work just on the curriculum design and consulting team at Mount Vernon Ventures.
Well, thanks so much for being here, team. I thought we could just have a conversation sort of about the future of education, a giant, broad topic. But I thought, some interesting ideas and just conversation might come out of that. And then we'll see who else we can get on this podcast to continue those conversations. So recently there was a Forbes article that said there are two biggest trends in education, and it was rethinking what we teach and then rethinking how we teach it. So certainly that sort of collects all of the different topics and idea under those two headings. So definitely broad, but what are your thoughts on either of those or both? Who wants to jump in and just start that conversation?
Yeah, I think that just both of those remind me of the work that we're doing around competency-based education, and especially personalized competency-based education, because I think the Mount Vernon School as a whole, we're really rethinking what we teach under the lenses of the competencies, but also how we're teaching it, because it needs to be personalized for our learners with varied pathways and different pacing. And so that's the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me, is just thinking about all of that exciting work and kind of where we are on our journey and what we still have to do in that work.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I agree. I think that increasingly over the past couple of years, competency-based education has really clicked with me in a way, specifically when we switched over to a different LMS and started basically having to assess based on competencies, very, very, up close and personal. It really showed me that in terms of the future of education, what that could look like. I don't know how much I retained from my own high school education, looking back. I remember things like the Battle of Hastings was in 1066, and that doesn't seem to do me much good right now. Or I'll remember that maybe I did a book report on Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage 3 years in a row, which was definitely my fault. I should have read another book, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure that I could grab some type of transferable skill and say, oh, that started when I was in high school and I've carried it with me. Maybe there is one, I don't know. But for me, I think competencies give us a way of doing that. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah. And I think that you're bringing up a really good point about real world learning and doing. And I'm excited to see that, how we're changing what we think of as assessment, what we think of as the content that's important, and thinking about how curiosity and passion can really influence what we're learning and how we're learning it and how we're assessing it. So yeah, instead of just doing whatever was done to us, thinking about learning from what didn't work for us and how we can make it better for learners who have jobs that will have jobs that we don't even know exist yet. So, yeah.
That's a great point, Ann Marsh. You can read all over the news how the jobs of, the future. Well, the future is the next 5, 10 years. Some of them, most of them haven't even been really created yet. So what are learners or students doing now? What are they learning now in school to prepare them for that? And to your point, Ben, the content that was just like, here, this is part of the curriculum, check the box, something you had to memorize isn't really relevant anymore. And it's more about those soft skills of, can you be a collaborator? Can you be a solution seeker? How do you work in teams? There was a recent article that talked about WeQ. So we've heard about EQ, but now it's WeQ. So many people are working remote. They're trying to be collaborative on Zoom or, another platform. And how do you do that? And when you get back together, what are the skills that you need to really be able to work with other people? And what does that look like in schools?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's definitely a viewpoint that you could take that's very pessimistic about the future that our current learners are going to inherit. And just thinking about, like, they're going to be having to solve a lot of problems that they didn't create. And I hope that we are preparing them for really feeling like they can design a better world and have a sense of agency around making a positive impact in their world. I mean, that would be one of my biggest hopes, is that they come out of all of these challenges with a sense of resiliency, that they can take on a lot of problems. And I don't know, I definitely think that using that lens of empathy, especially as we think about like automation and how machines will take over a lot of jobs, there is a human element that can never be replaced. And that's something that it will be really important for us to instill in our learners, that doing the things that a machine can't do and doing them well, teaching them how to interact, just like you were saying, Alex, the collaboration piece, and taking the perspective of another person, thinking about things from their viewpoint, and hopefully creating kids who can come together instead of be divided.
No, I love that. So certainly staying under the heading of rethinking what we teach. So the two of you have been in the classroom, and I do feel very blessed to be at the Mount Vernon School that is really innovative with their curriculum and their teaching practices. So maybe can you share just one or two stories of either actual content or an actual experience that students have now that is a different something that we're doing differently as far as the content. You've mentioned some mindsets, you've mentioned some skill sets, what did you want to focus on?
I mean, I think, yeah, sure. So in my particular, subset of the humanities, which is usually history, I came from kind of a setting where, for history, a lot of the time it's focused on content, to a heavy degree, and then you sort of get some skills along with that. So it's very, it may be very important, in a U.S. history survey that, for example, like the difference between the first New Deal and the second New Deal or something like that. And don't get me wrong, it's important. And, the New Deal is, for good reason, one of the most, transformative periods in American history. But I think that what our humanities team does a lot, and we're not alone, but what we would do there is we wouldn't necessarily, slam the New Deal, down on the table, or try and cram it as forcefully into students' heads as possible and say, which one did Social Security come from? Was it the first New Deal or was it the second? Which one was it? You have to know. Not that that's not important, but we might say, okay, how about we craft an argument about why the New Deal historically was important and how it still carries import today, politically and socially. And so the skill is expressing an idea, or the skill is crafting an argument supported by, relevant and verifiable historical evidence, as opposed to tell me which New Deal Social Security came in. And so it's not that content isn't important, but it's that skills are playing kind of a primary role, and content is something that assists in the development of skills. So you get good content, but that content is reinforced because you did something with it, not just because you memorized it.
Yeah. And then I also hear you saying that you're working on those higher level thinking skills, right? It's not just about remembering, it's really the application of a skill and the connection to modern day.
Right.
So that kids can really transfer the learning to their own context and make a difference. Yeah.
Exactly. And this can happen. Oh, sorry. This can happen in a variety of settings too. I mean, we do this a lot at Mount Vernon, but the College Board in recent years has really emphasized more argumentative skills as well. And so, I mean, it doesn't have to be, like some type of you could teach skills, you can teach competencies, you can teach, transferable stuff and transform the future of education, without like totally reinventing and radicalizing everything about school. There are all sorts of ways to do this, but I think, at least in my mind, the point is, okay, cool. If we can shift our emphasis as a nation onto these transferable skills, then maybe that's a way to keep heading in a good direction.
Yeah, I agree. I'm thinking about, my background from the elementary lens. Elementary is the place for foundational skills. Like, you've got to learn how to read, you've got to learn foundational math skills. But, I'm thinking about our 5th grade team who applied the math and a lot of the design thinking skills that they had been learning into a playground design project. And so they were using geometry, they were using fractions, they were using measurement, they were using their basic operations through the lens of how might we build a playground in our open courtyard space that could really meet the needs of all of the learners on the lower campus. And so, it's that kind of thing, which I really feel like echoes what you're saying, Ben, that you're taking the content and the skills, but you're transferring it to their real lives. And that's the stuff that makes them hang on to it, unlike your Battle of Hastings that wasn't relevant for your life, right? You're connecting it to a bigger schema of knowledge and skills that's relevant and important to them. And that's definitely something that I hope we see more of, a more learner-centered approach, and especially building on that authentic opportunities for learning.
So what I hear both of you saying, which leads into kind of the next part, is not rethinking, what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it. Reminds me of a conversation I recently had with Jim Tippin, who is our director of our MDE program, Maker Design Engineering. And he was talking about the increase in technology that, it's everywhere, right? And certainly bringing into schools and education, and specifically was talking about the 3D printer, where looking at the tools in the Maker Lab, like the printer, it wasn't so much of, the purpose of this class was to learn how to 3D print. So here's the machine, this is where you turn it on, here's the program, here's how you save a file, you push, start, and then suddenly magically this 3D printed figurine or iPhone stand, whatever you design,
sounds great.
Out. Yeah, sounds amazing. But looking at the tool, the 3D printer, not so much as the contents, you're not learning to 3D print. You're looking at the tool, the 3D printer, as the material that you're going to do something with. So as you're designing, I don't know, fill in the blank, a 3D printed hand for Alex Linkus, who is a student that we worked with a few years ago, and they created a prosthetic hand using the 3D printer, or you're making keychains for the front desk, or you're creating signage for a particular part of the school. You're using the 3D printer as a tool, but you're doing something with it. And the learning are all the skills of designing and iterating and collaboration with other people and the feedback to get to the final product, which wasn't learning how to use a 3D printer. So like Ben, in your example, learning about the New Deal, yes, you learned about the New Deal and its context and history, but all of the historical events that happened, and then what was the effect on history and the United States because of that content. Or Ann Marsh, like you weren't just learning graphs and measurement and math, but that you used it for something. Does that sound right? Is that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
totally.
I think anytime you have that real world person or project or product that you can put out there, the better it is, right? The learners are excited and motivated to make something for somebody instead of just doing a project at school.
For sure. So under those other two headings, I mean, I feel like there's so many rabbit holes we could totally go down, and hopefully we'll be able to unpack those on future podcasts. But anything else that lies under each of those two big buckets that popped into your head today during our discussion?
Well, I just looking in the for those who are listening, we're just a reminder, we're looking at the two biggest future trends in education, which is an article that popped up in Forbes about a year ago. But one thing that the writer discusses in the first part is, in addition to, he says soft skills like creativity and communication, yada, yada, he said he would add ethics and diversity to that list. And I think that's exactly right, ethics and diversity. But I also think that combination raises some other important questions too, right? Ethics and diversity. So diversity is incredibly important, especially in today's day and age, for obvious reasons. But ethics, by their very nature, can sometimes be particularistic. So I think it's an important challenge to think through. How do we teach ethics? How do we, instill the skills of an ethical decision maker without being, too particular, without being narrow-minded, or without being too moralistic? How do we think ethically while accounting for a diverse populace, a diverse citizenry, a diverse student body? That to me is maybe one of the most important questions that I think we have to think through. And I don't know, maybe I'm not well read enough yet, but I don't know if we have an answer. Any thoughts there?
I think you're spot on, Ben. It was interesting for our work with our next strategic plan. We've been doing a lot of research on capturing signals. So like, what are current moments or current examples that are sort of pointing to where the future is going? And something we came upon, and I don't know of anything else at this point, but to my current knowledge, Stanford is the only university in the world that offers a major that combines ethics and technology and like AI.
Interesting.
So obviously at Stanford, I feel like they're
pretty
ahead
good
of everybody else. Yeah, they're pretty good.
They're okay.
The fact that they're the only ones, or maybe there are a couple, but it's obviously not a very widespread major yet. But I feel like you're right. That's definitely something that is important, and it's going to be part of the future. It just has to be.
That's super interesting. And Matt Nealon, our colleague, he said recently to me in a video call, he said, the future is knowing the right question to ask a robot. And I think that is super relevant. And I may even add, yes, the future is also getting a human to do the right thing with a robot, or an algorithm or something like that. And so I wonder how the folks at Stanford are going about that. That'd be something I'd love to dig into a bit. And just research.
I feel like this totally makes the connection for me about the work that we're doing around social and emotional learning.
Mhm.
And just thinking about, a piece of social and emotional learning is responsible decision making. And it's, things like relationship skills and social awareness and self-awareness, and like I think there's so many questions that come up about that, right? Like, how are you aware of yourself in terms of other humans? And how are you aware of yourself in terms of a robot? And how do you manage yourself with all of those different areas? A long time ago, we used to talk about code switching, but I think there's an element of that. Like, how do you talk differently to a robot than you would to a human? Or like, how will you make a responsible decision about what you're going to do with technology versus how do you make a responsible decision about how to treat a peer? Is a really interesting questions for us to think about, working with our learners from a really young age in an explicit way to build those social and emotional skills.
That's awesome. Well, to just kind of wrap it up, I want to be mindful of people's time. I know everyone's so busy, so trying to keep it crispy. But one of the things I think is always really helpful for certainly teachers and administrators, right now there's so much stress and chaos and the pandemic and online learning and trying to navigate the burnout of the current situation. But what are maybe one or two tangible takeaways that a teacher could do right now? I mean, obviously this conversation is a big one and can go in many different directions, but is there a place that you guys think is maybe a good one to learn more information, or maybe just something that you can start doing as you think about what we're teaching and rethinking how we're teaching it?
One of the things that I talk to teachers a lot about is who is doing the most thinking in the classroom. Is it you as the teacher, or is it the learners? And I think that that's a really important first step, is making sure, through our inquiry-based approach to learning, that the people in the room who are doing the most work and the most thinking are the students. And so, taking the focus off of us as teachers and approaching our practice less as actors and more as scientists who are making observations and asking the right questions at the right time to the right kids. That would be my first. That would be my first step, is, make it less about you and more about the learners.
Love that. It's like the old adage of, instead of being the sage on the stage, or the guide on the side.
Yep.
Right. Ben, any maybe takeaways, or
as far as just one thing to implement that might start paying immediate dividends? Yeah, I can't I can't speak for everybody, but one thing that really affected my practice is giving students time to evaluate their own work. So if they're writing an argument, ask them to assess, give them a rubric and say, hey, how do you think you did here? And don't have points attached to it. Don't have it as like this this thing that has bearing on their grade. But I think students really enjoy that, and I'm not entirely sure that they always get entrusted, if that's even the right word, with the time and means to really take a look at their own work and say, okay, well, did I do it? Did I compellingly articulate this point, or did I express this idea in the way that I thought that I did? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And so that once I really began to experiment with self-assessment, I noticed pretty quickly more engagement.
Well, I love that. Well, thanks so much for this conversation. I'm excited to unpack so many different rabbit holes that have come up for me, and we can invite more and be experts to really dive into some of these different areas for sure. So thanks for joining us today and being part of our launch for this podcast, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks,
everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Sounds good.
Bye.